In this chapter, or rather in this video, we're going to talk about the Panic of 1893 and some other things that changed the decade of the 1890s and how money was circulated, how it was valued, but then also how the American economy is interconnected. You see, in in the 2008 financial crisis, many companies were deemed as being too big to fail. Companies like General Motors, Ford Motor Company, AIG, some of these large corporations, to where if they fall under, the economic effect will trickle down and have a disastrous effect overall. If they fail, that could lead to other failures that are far more widespread that would be even worse. So the government enacted various different bailouts so as to keep some of these countries afloat. And over the course of the next decade, these companies were able to pick themselves back up and repay the government the debt that they were bailed out for otherwise. Okay, so one of the lessons that we learned in 2008 actually comes back from the Panic of 1893. You see, one of the largest railroads at the time started falling under. And one of its competitors, the National Cartage Company, also started to fail as well. Well, when you have two large corporations that fall under, that reduces confidence in the economy. And not only that, the stock market. And if two major players in the stock market destructively tumble, well, that's going to have an adverse effect on other companies that are also invested. So you're going to tank the market, and as you have big banks and other entities that are invested in the market, they're going to collapse. So now, because you had these two big companies collapse, it reduced confidence in the stock market, which plunged the stock market, and companies that were invested now collapsed. So now you have all these banks that are going out of business, which means that there's no longer money available to be lent in the form of loans. So you essentially contract the amount of money that is available for lending, for credit. That's disastrous. And that's a lot of also what happened in 2008. So it's amazing how history repeats itself there. But one of the things we learned in 2008 was, gosh, well, it really sucks that we're having to bail out these companies. If we don't, there could be far worse consequences. We've got to do something. And we learned from the Panic of 1893 exactly just how that might happen. Okay, so that also being said, because many companies were going out of business, you have rampant unemployment. You have civil unrest in the streets because people are out of work and they're not being paid. And so you have various different folks who want to organize marches for the unemployed, perhaps start up a civil works process or anything else of the standpoint to get people back to work. But otherwise, the middle class really felt the power of that panic in 1893, and that's something that we learned from at the time to this day. Now, I want you to think about money, particularly cash, dollar bills. The United States dollar, the US dollar, has its value in confidence in our government. In the 1800s, the value of a dollar was based off of specie, precious metals like gold and silver, basically. Nowadays, it's not. Nowadays, we have economic power through our gross domestic product and other aspects that give market power for the United States dollar in comparison with like the British pound or the euro or any other form of currency. Okay? Back then, there was a consensus that America could have a bimetallism product to where you could mine silver and gold, and silver would basically gold rather would be 16 times worth silver. So for every 1 ounce of gold, the equivalent value would be 16 ounces of silver. That's how it was deemed at the time. Well, several different things were starting to take place around that time, one of which was how silver began to perhaps reduce in commercial value. There was speculation that you could sell your silver to the government for a mint, or you could sell your silver perhaps to jewel makers for a higher price and make more money that way. That had an effect of perhaps a reduction of there being silver available for the government to mint new silver coin. Think about it this way. You could sell the government all your silver and you'll get $100. Or you can go to a pawn shop or a jewel maker, sell all your equivalent amount of silver and make $300. What are you going to do? That jeweler's going to make that silver and make all kinds of different necklaces and rings and any other different things that make them viable. So what would you do? Well, I'd rather have $300 than $100. So when that happens, now the government is seeing a contraction in the amount of silver available to mint. So instead of producing more silver coins, they focus a little bit more on gold, and that puts silver into question. However, there were people who wanted to basically undo the gold stranglehold that placed value in the dollar in our monetary system. You see, there were politicians running for president around this time, most notably William Jennings Bryan, who was a Democrat who advocated silver currency, and he deemed gold currency as being tools of the ultra wealthy and various different corporations. He wanted to see more silver mined into the markets because silver, if you own a silver mine, well, you've got a stake in that success. So silver miners obviously would support somebody with this mindset. And then farmers. Farmers had the idea that if we produce more silver, the value of which could inflate farm worth and agricultural output worth, which in that case would mean that farmers would get more money and the amount on their debts that they owe would be mitigated because of the inflation. So you see a rising effect. So farmers and silver miners would naturally want to support William Jennings Bryan in his platform. But in doing so, William J. Bryan was a hardcore Democrat. Farmers at this time, remember the Granger, or rather the Farmers Alliance, they were populists. They kind of broke away from the Democratic Party. If they supported William J. Bryan, then would that dissolve the Populist Party? Or would it mean that they support Democrats who they don't always see eye to eye? So that divided the Democratic Party. And in 1896, you have William Jennings Bryan run against he would run against McKinley, who we've talked about in the past, who was a Republican. And at that time, the 1896 presidency was very contentious, but it was also the era in American history where modern campaigning was really taken into place. Nowadays, you see politicians, maybe not in the coronavirus era, but you see politicians in modern elections, they go to key states, battleground states, and they give speeches, and you see grand conventions, and Donald Trump's going to speak, and you're going to see thousands of people support him in this state, and a Democratic candidate's going to come here in California and speak and really rally the cause behind the Democratic base or the Republican base, and they go from state to state to state to state. Well, McKinley was the first politician to really take advantage of that. And William McKinley visited nearly every state over 18,000 miles worth of traveling to, to campaign for the 1896 election, and he really gained power. So he won the election, and for those who advocated for silver and advocated for populism, they got destroyed. And therefore, it had a severe dampening effect um, upon their populist beliefs. And William McKinley would become president, and he would raise tariffs on other international entities. So he would also enact a Gold Standard Act, which would mean that at the time, the United States dollar would have its value based upon the backing of gold. So this division within populists and the Democrats led to the emergence of the Republican Party being dominant as far as at least presidential elections are concerned. But other things would also come into play around this time. The United States would be on the verge of growth outside of its own country. We would be concerned now with growth elsewhere around the world.